Secret Squirrel Society. We are talking about UFOs today with the expert, Richard Ching. He has encountered many EBEs in Augusta, a family of EBEs. I'm sure he's going to tell us that story soon. So I think this podcast came about because I have watched and you have watched a lot of information about UFOs over at least 20 years. I mean, it's been a while, maybe 30 years. So um, I started to realize I'm kind of drawing conclusions about it. And the interesting thing is the American public, they've started to take it seriously because the government started to release some UFO footage. And we were just looking at this presidential website. We don't have to share it right now. We'll go back to it. But I started to think about it. And, I'm a big fan of Y Files. I think that's well researched. They have a lot of UFO information there. And then 10 years ago, me and my son Evan used to watch Unsealed Alien Files, which I think is exceptional. They bring out a lot of facts. And I started to realize there's a lot of pieces to the story. So, I'll go over some of the things I saw, but please jump in at any time.
Mhm.
And I'm going to share this. These are just some notes I took, but they aren't necessarily comprehensive, but they're things that kind of struck me as possibly legitimate, right? So let me go try to find that. I don't know why I can't put it up there. Let's see if we can put it up there. Sorry about that. I had it a minute ago, but cannot do it now. So let me go see if I can share it one more time. Otherwise, I'll just read it. Let me just read it. So the first thing I noticed is, and you jump in anytime, Richard, is that these kind of ideas of UFOs started about 80 years ago. So there was a few incidences that happened. Really, the first one that I think is, and again, there's a millions of sightings and records of what was going on. But I think one of the things we can say is one of the first ones that we felt was
Uh-oh. Can you hear me? Hello? Cliff, can you hear me?
oh, am I back?
Yeah, we just got cut off. I was gonna
Yeah,
type.
the thing, the thing is our internet's really bad, so need to replace it soon. Um, so you had something that was kind of an observational thing, and then I think what happened in the late 40s and the 50s, there was a few big incidents that happened, and then became popularized. Like so, they started to say these unidentified flying objects were from aliens from a different planet. So that's kind of a leap, but that's where society went after that. So, of course, people know about the famous ones like Kenneth Arnold flying his plane over Washington State and seeing these things that he termed flying saucers. Uh, Roswell happened in 1947. That was originally an obscure local event, but then there was a book written about it in 1978, which popularized it. There's a story about after World War II, there was Operation High Jump, where there was U.S. forces went down to the South Pole, and I think effectively they were looking for a Nazi base, but there was some alleged encounters with UFOs, right?
I'm not did I, I read very briefly about uh, that that operation, Operation High Jump. Was that like a
Yeah.
high-ranking officer that had, well, he said that he approved that there were uh, Nazi base over there. That's why he put up a team. He put, a lot of people to go there, but I'm not sure what was the outcome though. You know anything more about that though?
Yeah, they document it pretty well. Basically what happened is that they did go down there and they were supposed to stay for quite a while, but they actually came back early, right? And then there was a lot of allegations about what they encountered. I don't know if they're true or not, but allegedly Admiral Byrd, when he was flying, encountered a UFO, right? So this again was like 80 years ago. This is the mid 1940s. But yeah, I think not many people know about it. Annie Jacobs has written a few books, maybe not a few books, but she has written a book on Operation Paperclip, which is related to Operation High Jump. And
Mm.
Operation Paperclip was when the U.S. government took Nazi scientists and brought them to the United States to help with the space program. So I think her book goes into this a little bit, maybe, right? So some of these original UFO sightings were just observational, right? Not much more than that. There's one I never heard of, which they talked about. I think I found one about this thing one called Operation Main Brace, which was in 1952. There was some NATO war games, and there was several UFOs sighted, right? And they were not sighted by one person; they were sighted by several personnel in different militaries. So there was one that happened in 1952 over DC. There were some glowing orbs over the Capitol. And I think about that time, that's when it became popularized. They didn't know what these things were, so they just started to map it to aliens, people from a different planet, right? So, from that perspective, that's purely observational. There's some speculation it's alien. But as time went on, there was more and more um, post-war events that became more intense. So they weren't just visual. There were some encounters that happened. Right. There's been several UFO sightings at schools. Right. There's one in the Zimbabwe school where there was an alien encounter. Right. So then in the 40s they had this idea of, well, these objects we cannot identify in the sky. It kind of went to the next level when they said, well, we encountered these objects in the sky. They came down and they were non-human creatures, right? So that kind of grew from that. There's one nobody talks about, Falcon Lake, which there was some physical evidence. A person had burnt clothing, and there was a burnt circle on the ground with radioactive molten metal, right? So they don't talk about that one as much. That's in Canada. There's a famous one in England called Rendlesham Forest, where
I
two
heard about that one.
U.S. soldiers encountered an alien, right? And then they started to talk about how they saw hieroglyphics on the alien. And then later on, one of the guys who had the encounter had some message transmitted in his brain, and it was decoded to talk about a place called High Brazil. So you're starting to see as time goes on, the stories don't become observational; they become fantastic, like hard to believe, right?
Hmm.
There is a pretty legitimate one, which is known as the Cash Landrum episode in 1980, where two ladies were driving in Texas. They saw a UFO that was encountered by U.S. military helicopters, and they did have radiation sickness, right? And then there's one that's pretty famous. So jumping to 1989 with Bob Lazar coming out saying that the Area 51 had alien technology and that they reverse engineered, right? So it becomes observational in the 40s and the 50s to alien encounters, to exotic, you know, technology, possibly from aliens. And then there's one that's happened lately that people have talked about since 2017, which are these videos of the Tic Tac on the USS Nimitz. That
Mhm.
was released in 2017. It actually happened in 2004. And that has popularized UFOs. But up until then, it was kind of a fringe subject, but it was popularized it. And then there was the one that's happened actually pretty recently. It was happened in 2016. You and I saw Disclosure Day. I don't know if you remember that one video that the guy released at the end that said that had that big pyramid in the sky. I don't know. It was they just flashed it for 1 second. It was like a video out of a jet fighter, but
Yeah,
that is based on reality. That is based on reality, right? Like that's called the Pendrick UFO incident in Wales, where there were many um, eyewitnesses that saw this pyramid-like UFO just kind of float, and it was a thousand. It was about 1,000 kilometers long, right? That sounds wrong. 1,000 feet long, I should say. So that was pretty shocking, and there was a lot of witnesses to it. So I think that's pretty legitimate. There's also one that showed up in the movie too, which was the Kecksburg incident, right? And that's when you had a UFO crash that people have talked about, which could be some kind of alien technology, or it could be a UFO, kind of like not a UFO, but a hidden technology by the military. So those are some credible UFO events, and I think what you can say is those are kind of observational, right? Those are kind of observational. Then they change into physical, even to the point of possibly encountering aliens. But I think the alien encounter is like another branch of this. So I was going to get to that a little bit later. But I think what you also notice, which people miss out on, is there's a lot of government involvement with these encounters, right?
Mhm.
So, first of all, because of the hysteria with the UFOs, the U.S. government had a succession of programs or projects that address these UFOs. Project Sign, Project Grudge, Project Blue Book, which is the most famous and lasted the longest, and then Project Aquarius. Now that's questionable because that one's not heard of because it's supposed to be covering up alien technology and communications. That's why people don't talk about Project Aquarius too much. And then there was this famous Condon report, which I know our friend Dan, he has a website. He was talking about it in the 60s. They came out with a committee of scientists and officials basically wanting to debunk all UFOs, right? So you do see this government involvement. And then what came about, I would say, starting in the late 70s and 80s, is the intelligence community kind of getting involved with the UFO community, right? So this idea of Roswell, which is very famous now, was kind of an unknown event until this guy named Bill Moore came out with a book in 1978 talking about it, right? And the Roswell incident became famous, but guess what happened? That some of the stuff that Bill Moore had learned was from a government agent named Richard Doty. Richard Doty was an Air Force intelligence officer who intentionally misled the UFO community. In fact, we talked about this the other day. There's a movie called Mirage Men, which basically describes what Richard Doty's did for many years, right? So you had active, basically in the late 70s, probably earlier, you had active military intelligence involved with kind of misdirecting UFO inquiries, right? So before, because of the hysteria in the late 40s for UFOs, early 50s, they had these public projects that investigated UFOs, but then probably not even probably starting before, but sometime in the mid to late 70s, there started to be this active involvement with government agents. And coincidentally, the stories about UFOs became more fantastic.
Mhm.
And Mirage Man does a very good job sort of explaining how Richard Doty injected a lot of these ideas into the mainstream media. He also was involved with a guy named Paul Benowitz, who had observed some secret technology, and basically Richard Doty misled him to think that the U.S. Army was engaging with aliens, like fighting aliens, right? And then another Richard Doty, um, I guess, scheme was this person named Myrna Hansen in 1980. She was talking about having missing time and surgical implants, but I think Richard Doty was involved with that. So what you see is a government agent embellishing sort of this UFO alien encounter to make it misdirect from possible secret technology, right? So I think you see that's pretty common. And then one thing of note that I noted, took in my notes, was this guy named John Lear, who came out in 1986 talking about Majestic 12, which was this story about how the government had a secret group that actually talked with aliens and talked about the many alien species. And then there was a guy named, I believe his name was Phil Hansen. He told the story about fighting aliens at this base called Dulce, which was in New Mexico, right? And again, there was a link to kind of government involvement here. So you start to see like these UFO stories become more and more fantastical the more and more the the government is involved, right? So um, and then you see like the aliens and the alien human hybrids and the lizard people and this idea of the Dulce papers around 1987. Uh, it was based on a guy named Thomas Castillo, and some people think it was a completely fictional person. So again, I think it's the government starting to tell stories to misdirect the UFO community, but also to some extent discredit the UFO community, right? So
Yeah.
I think there's a lot there. And it's not, his name wasn't Philip Hansen, it was Phil Schneider. He's the one that perpetuated in 1995 this idea of Valiant Thor. And this is a pretty fantastic story, but he claimed that there was an alien named Valiant Thor that was in the Pentagon, right? And he also claimed that um, there was an underground alien base in Dulce, New Mexico, that did the cattle mutilation and did alien human hybrids, right? So again, where do these stories come from? Or how can you substantiate them? Nobody really knows. Nobody knows where these people came from. A lot of times you can't really verify a lot of things they say, but it started to create a mythos. It wasn't just observational where you saw this, this alien craft in the sky or something you can't identify. You're inferring it's from aliens, but it started to morph into a mythos where you had aliens here. They're, they're creating alien human hybrids. They have an underground base. They're in the government. The government's doing reverse engineering of UFO technology. You had this proliferation of, going from observational to fantastic. And then you see this underlying current of intelligence officials kind of perpetuating some of it, right? One I thought was pretty hilarious was called Planet Serpo. So there's this story circulating about Planet Serpo, about basically people from Earth going to Planet Serpo. Of course, staying youthful while everyone ages on Earth, going near the speed of light, and then coming back. Very similar to what Close Encounters was, right? Do you remember when you had in the beginning these World War II aircraft in the desert, and that was kind of the start of the film. At the end of the film, you saw aliens bring back the pilots
The
that
pilot,
they
yes.
took 30 years before.
Hmm.
Yeah, that. And then someone pointed out in 2000 that the story of Planet Serpo is exactly the story of Close Encounters, right? And when people were digging around, finding out who transmitted this story, the IP address went to who? Richard Doty. He would make up this stuff and send it into the UFO community. They would believe it, right? So, you know, and then finally, the government started to disclose things in 2017. Trump administration, we were just trying to show it a minute ago. They're disclosing things now, just because of this long record of how the government interacts with the UFO community and the possible cover-ups they do. It's kind of hard to believe there's going to be anything that's totally convincing, right? So I try to get some up, but I've looked at a number of the videos, and so they're interesting, but you have to realize the technology is infrared technology. So what you're looking at is heat signatures. So if something looks bright, it's actually heat, right? And it's moving. It's moving in odd ways. But to say that you go from that curiosity to jump and leap to aliens, that's a little bit of a assumption, right? So can we say there's aliens? We don't know. That would be my answer. But to say there's proof of it, that would be hard to prove. Now, some people, like even elected representatives and some whistleblowers, claim to have actually seen alien, the actual aliens. So until we see that, I'll just say that we don't know, right?
And they
So
always,
I think the government needs.
and they always, uh, when Congress asks for it, like, have you seen extraterrestrial bodies? And they always uh, dodge the question. They will say, "Yes, I have, but I cannot discuss it at the present time."
Yeah, yeah,
So it's a. They say yes, I've seen it, but that's all you need to know. There's no details. Always
right,
dodging the
right.
question. It's true. Like I say, I will say 95% that light or whatever's out there, there's gotta be an explanation. But then there's some, like you said, there's um, some sightings that are so fantastic, so amazing that you look at it. Hundreds of people look at it at the same time. They start scratching their head. That we don't know. But like I say, aliens, not likely. Uh, Possibly something more advanced, you know, that a human could have created, but we don't know. Very, very,
Exactly.
it's going to be very mysterious, though. Hopefully, one day, we'll find something, that say, yeah, those are aliens. Yes, those are extraterrestrial technology. But so far, the it's very interesting and it's ongoing. The fantastic about the UFO enigma.
The enigma. Hey, listen, give me 1 minute. I need to plug this in, so just give me 1 minute. I'll go off camera for a second.
Yes, Hakui.
But we'll continue to talk. But I think what's really interesting is that you went from something observational, and then when people started making a big deal about it, the government started stepping in. First of all, just to be, I guess a responsible government to sort of look into something just in case it's a threat. It's like a threat to the nation and stuff. But then you start to realize they started to, embellish and add to the UFO pieces to the point where I think in the end, what you have to conclude is they're hiding something. So that's one of the things you can really conclude in the end is they must be hiding something because they got into the UFO business, I think first as a public service. And notice the early stuff, and I think it was legitimate too. The early stuff was basically saying, you know, that all this stuff is just, easily explained. And I do think a good portion of them are easily explained. So I think that's
Mhm.
true. But also, I think And it's kind of proven in a way. I think a lot of it was also, oh, we have secret technology. We don't really want to share it. So we want to, if someone thinks there's an alien that's coming down to visit the Earth, and it's really something that's a secret technology, we'll just tell them it's an alien coming down to visit the Earth, right? Because we want to encourage that, right? So sorry, I think bottom line, that's what's going on, is that's part of the story, right?
Yeah.
I think we can say that's true.
Mm-hmm.
So if that was the end of it, and sorry about all the moving around, if that was the end of it, I think we'd say that's not very interesting. But I think there is a different aspect. And sorry, I'm going to get back on. Oh, it don't happen in my background.
Akui, I see darkness behind you.
Oh, I'm back in space. First liftoff, then back in space. So I think what's interesting is after a while, at first it was unidentified objects, and then there was physical evidence. Then there was this idea of alien encounters. So it kind of progressed over time from the call it mid to late 1940s to about the mid 70s, right? So people did see stuff. Occasionally they would encounter something physical. Sometimes they would, see an alien or what they thought was an alien. I don't know what they saw. But what's really interesting is, and I guess it started in the 1960s, some activity in the 70s, but it took off in the 80s. So if you ever remember the book Communion by Whitley Strieber, that was the big thing about aliens abducting humans, um, them having encounters where they didn't remember stuff, perhaps medical procedures. Um, and there's been movies made about it, Fire in the Sky and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So there are several, Benny and Barney, not Benny and Barney, Betty and Barney Hill. This was a couple back in the 60s. They had missing time and they met these grays, what people call grays now. And these grays said they were from Zeta Reticuli. Again, can you really trust it? How do they know they're from Zeta Reticuli? I don't know, right? So, but I think people know a few of them. There was these fishermen that were abducted in Pascagoula
That's the good.
abduction cases. Yeah, and they had some encounter. And again, if you watch the Y files, they start to debunk a lot of this stuff. Of course, the famous one is Fire in the Sky, Travis Walton being abducted and having missing time. There's a few others about, cattle mutilations and stuff like that. And then there was the famous one about Whitley Strieber. He got abducted in the 80s. And what he realized, because I read the book back in 88, is he was subject to abductions his whole life. He just didn't remember it, right? And then there's this idea that came about the same time about alien human hybrids. So they started saying, oh, well, not only do people get abducted and they have these invasive medical procedures, but they also create alien human hybrids, right? So it started to get very bizarre after a while. The interesting thing about these alien human hybrid stories is a lot of them were, I guess, uncovered by hypnosis, right? So John Mack and Bud Hopkins used to use hypnosis. And, if Felipe was here, he would tell you one time we went to MUFON and they were talking about this very subject. John Mack or maybe Bud Hopkins, they would put them under hypnosis. And then they would say things like, I've been abducted by aliens. I've been impregnated by an alien. I have a, alien human hybrid child. all these fantastical stories, and you can tell it had a huge impact on culture because that's some of the that's some of the stories behind X Files, right? You remember Scully gets abducted, and she possibly had an alien human hybrid child, right? But the interesting thing, and Felipe will tell you, is we were at MUFON one time before the pandemic, and they I think the guy was going through a video, I think, of Bud Hopkins talking about this. I'm pretty sure it's Bud Hopkins. It could have been John Mack. Bud Hopkins, I think. So he was talking about it, blah, blah, blah. And then somebody in the MUFON audience said, I'm familiar with this. Like he knew them personally. And he said that they basically led the witness to believe this, right? So this, these encounters and this account of being abducted and being impregnated and having alien human hybrids, at least this person in the audience was saying, actually, the person doing the hypnosis suggested these things to them, right? So it wasn't like I put you under
Mm,
hypnosis and then you tell me,
yeah.
you had an alien abduction and they had an alien human hybrid. It was more like I put you under hypnosis and say, do you think you've been abducted by aliens? Do you think you have an alien human hybrid child? Right. So some of these stories are very suspect, right? And again, even though there's no direct connection, I do not doubt if there was some government influence here, right? Um, so one thing of note is with all these, you know, with all these accounts, you start to see kind of a three or four main categories of aliens that people talk about. And again, where these ideas come from, I don't know. But you have these grays, which people see, like we saw on Disclosure Day, right?
Mm,
Sort of big eyes, small. The one we saw was big, but big eyes and small and kind of fragile. Then you have basically humans. They're called Nordics, which are tall white people. And then you have these other ones called reptilians, which are basically
mm,
um, humanoid reptilians, right? So I think that's pretty interesting. Where they come up with these ideas and these accounts, I'm not sure, but I can say that the reptilians would be an obvious situation. The tall whites or the Nordics would be obvious too, right? So the tall Nordics could be just other humans, right? And then reptilians, they could have, been around when the dinosaurs were here. Who knows, right? Or they could say they're from Draco, which doesn't make any sense because if you're actually from Draco, you'd have no idea that that is where you're from until you come to Earth and you say, "Oh, that's Draco," right? So, same thing with Zeta Reticuli. So it is interesting that there's enough people with enough encounters that there's a classification. Most people think of aliens as these grays, and there's a lot of theories where that comes from. But you have this, again, just recounting it. You go from observational things in the sky to uh, basically physical evidence. So it gets pretty interesting. Physical evidence, um, possible stories of alien encounters, and then it jumps to we got abducted by aliens and they're doing physical experiments and they're creating children. So it becomes very fantastical pretty quick, right? But then there's a suspicion here because some of these stories came from under hypnosis and it could have been leading hypnosis, right? So, just trying to piece together and make sense of all this UFO stuff. Um,
mm.
so I think if we could stop there, I think that'd be even more than enough. But what's more and more interesting is then you have some very, very speculative stuff, right? It gets very, very speculative, right? So there's all kinds of things that go in that direction. Um,
You know what? Like back in the 40s, 50s, where technology was not advanced, you know, I would say there was more credible, but now with today's technology, you know, with Photoshop and all that, AI. You can make something very, very that looks really, really lifelike, and people will probably will say, "Man, I could have saw this. That's real," you know. So I don't know. That's my
Oh yeah, I
opinion.
think nowadays, and nowadays it would be very hard to just accept physical, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, not physical, photographic evidence, right?
Yeah.
Because we know that AI can generate something that looks pretty
Yeah.
much real, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it'd be very difficult to just say, "Oh yeah, it's that convinced me it's definitely aliens." I think it would have to generally be some video of, verified that it's not fake, of an alien, right? It'd be
Mm-hmm.
verified that it's not an alien, right? So wanted to go over this last slide and then we can get into what you think's going on. So, and again, I'm just laying out things the way I see it. Definitely jump in on the things you see, right? Because, up until then, it's gone from observational to evidential to um, kind of hard to believe alien abductions and things like that. But then it gets very speculative, right? So there's a lot of, you know, different avenues to go down. And I'm just going to touch upon them quite honestly, because there's so much. So just to begin chronologically, the Nazis were associated with what's called the Thule Society. And allegedly, the Thule Society believed in this thing called Vril. There's actually a book based on it, and it was a secret society, and they felt they could contact aliens, right? In fact, there was a lady named Maria Orsic who they believe was a Nordic, and they contacted her. The reason why I mentioned that is some people suggest that the Nazis created their own UFOs based on their contact with aliens and what they called a UFO. Um, they actually created it, and it was called the Glocker or the bell. So it looked like a bell, right?
Mm.
And then there's this other thing, which is probably completely fictional, but some people still hold to it, which is this idea of the Granada Treaty, which is the U.S. government made a treaty with aliens, and behind that was this group called the Majestic 12. So you'll see and hear a lot about that. But if you go down to the root of it, and again, Y Files does an excellent job. Um, some of this could be just totally fictional, right? Um, so the idea was that Eisenhower made a deal. We exchange humans for technology, and then they claim that's the reason why we have fiber optics, semiconductors, lasers, titanium, and stealth bombers or stealth technology. So that's another thing that's extremely speculative, kind of a government conspiracy. This is where the X Files went for many, many seasons, right? That was kind of some of the premise behind X Files. What was Mulder and Scully uncovering? Basically, this idea that the government had a relationship with aliens and aliens abducted humans. And then we had secret technology. Then there's a couple of them that have become famous as of 2010, which is the ancient alien hypothesis, right? So von Donigan came out with the book Chariot of the Gods in 1973, interpreting a lot of alien artifacts as describing aliens, basically. And then Zachariah Sitchin, back in 1976, claimed that the Anunnaki were aliens that were behind the Sumerian myths, and and uh, and they lived on a planet called Nibiru, which came into the solar system every so often. I forgot how many years. Jacques Vallée, who's a very credible UFO researcher, his conclusion is the UFO encounters and the alien encounters are interdimensional. They're not alien. They're not from a different planet or extraterrestrial. They're actually interdimensional. Now, if you read beneath that a little bit, we can kind of map that to biblical ideas of angels and demons, right? They're interdimensional beings too. So that's interesting. Jacques is still pretty active, I think, writing things, and he's extremely intelligent. So I like to absorb some of the things he says, but that's his view of things. Stephen Greer, who I just got finished watching, he's been, I think Felipe was into this too. He was pushing more of like a new age uh, view of things, and he's calling it encounters of the fifth kind, and he's got a ton of TV shows and blah 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 about that. Which they're basically summoning aliens. They're basically going on top of Mount Shasta and saying, we can, with our minds, summon those little balls of light to come and communicate with us, right? So that's pretty speculative. There's also this guy that actually showed up in the MUFON conference I went to in 2017 through video. There's a guy named Gary McKinnon who hacked NASA back in 2000 and claimed to have found a secret space program in which there was an alien federation, right? So that's pretty speculative that not only do we have aliens, but have a government with aliens, right? And there's a secret space program, which is called Solar Warden. And then there's another one I've been reading, but I didn't finish it because it seems like another bit of misinformation, but it's called the Blue Planet Project, which came out in 2004. I got a copy if you want it, but it was basically talking about all the things that we covered before, which is invisible government, alien tech, Dulce base, cattle mutilation, crop circles, alien abductions, and mind control, right? So you remember the Disclosure Day, which we saw a couple of days ago, that was big into mind control, right? That was one of the big
Mm-hmm.
themes behind the movie. So where did that come from? Those movie makers don't get this out of nowhere. In fact, Chris Carter, when he was doing X Files, he got a lot of the ideas off of message boards back in the early 90s talking about this stuff. So now, how much of this stuff is grounded in reality? My opinion, other than Jacques Vallée, is probably not much. I
Mm.
don't know. I don't know if you've heard of all this stuff, but what's your opinion? Do you have any? You have your favorite ideas, and you think they're real? Anything like that?
No, like you say, it's very speculative, but it's fun to talk about. It's fun to see it on the news and things like that. But no, I don't think it's real. I think like you said, a lot of misinformation from the government just to throw us off. The more we talk about it, the more things we add to the narrative is better for them because you never know gonna know the
Yeah,
truth. So uh, all I'm hoping is at least that 2-3%, that you see something, man. I believe, but you know, but no,
yeah.
no, it hasn't happened. It hasn't happened. So.
Well, it's like I was telling you the other night. When I take my telescope out, I haven't done it lately, but when we were in the field one time, one of the guys said that the International Space Station is coming by, right? So I was pretty excited. I was able to track it for a very tiny period of time, but that thing moved across the sky like in a split second, right? And if somebody hadn't said, "Hey, the International Space Station is going to come by," I would have probably reported that as a UFO, right? So I'm sure there's lots of stuff that could happen, and I believe there's a lot of technology out there that you actually observe by accident, but it's human technology, right? Um, and I think that is something that is real. You could actually see that, and they won't confess to it. I think they'll probably send out some misinformation, like Richard Doty, to tell you that it's something else. But yeah, I think it would be cool to see it. I don't know if I told you this one time, but back before the pandemic, me and Curtis would go to the IHOP in Lilburn, and we would be there a little bit late, and we would talk about UFO stuff, and we were having a good time. One guy next to us actually said, and he was from Lilburn, he said something like, "Yeah, I saw a cigar shaped object just kind of float above my house," right? And I do not doubt him at all. But do I think it's an alien technology or aliens? I don't think so. It's probably something the government has but doesn't want you to know about, right? So in spite of it being lots of fun, my conclusion is a lot of this stuff is misinformation or just people making stuff up. I
Yeah.
don't think they make up the eyewitness reports and stuff like that. In fact, I don't think they make up every alien encounter, which I'll get to in a minute. But I do think you can kind of think of the UFO phenomena kind of in three buckets, right? So, the way I think about it is this, and again, part of it's informed by my Christian worldview, but I do think we, when we see things, that it is advanced technology from the US government or another government, right? And then there's this idea of breakaway civilizations, which is interesting. So, in other words, there is hidden technology out there, right? So, when, I'm kind of an armchair amateur physicist, when I study or listen to people talk about physics, I think gravity is not fully understood, right? So, if
Hmm.
somebody got gravity right and they created an anti-gravity propulsion device,
Hmm.
that's not out of the realm of possibility. In fact, I forgot the guy's name, but some guy, I think he's with the Navy, he filed several patents in the US Patent Office with fantastic technology you would not believe. And one of them, I believe, was anti gravity. So it's not out of the realm of possibility that there's a technology out there, but they just simply do not want the average person to have it, right? The governments want to keep it to themselves, right? So, like, for instance, some of the older sightings, I believe they were stealth technology, or they could be Nazi technology, right? So there's a speculation that a lot of the Nazis went to South America. There's a lot of UFOs over South America that could be Nazi technology,
Well,
right?
you know what
So
they say that Hitler is living in Argentina.
yeah, yeah, yeah. There are a lot. Like I had a someone that used to work for me at Equifax. He's from Argentina, but he could have easily said he was from Germany, or he's actually Polish, I think. But you know, yeah, it's not out of the realm of possibility that some remnant of the Third Reich went down into South America and continued whatever they were doing, right? And there's some speculation they had a technology to have a different kind of propulsion. They didn't say anti gravity, but a different kind of propulsion. In fact, your brother is the one that told me about the war.gov website, right? And I started looking through that a couple of days ago, and there are some things I downloaded. And you know what they were?
Were they like images, reports that
No, they
report?
were short reports, but guess what they were? They were talking about Nazis having advanced technology. So, I haven't had the time to go through all of it. Mainly I just want to see if a video convinces me otherwise that there's some, otherworldly technology to really look into. But it was interesting that they had on file declassified information about Nazi technology, right? So I'm going to look further into that. I think that's pretty interesting. And, we were talking about all the different, fairly legitimate, interesting cases in the UFO archives. This idea of Bob Lazar coming across a technology that was different than conventional propulsion, that seems to match what the Nazis were doing. They both were based on this idea of rotation of some kind of exotic material. Now, the allegation is the Nazi technology behind Die Glocker was actually mercury being rotated, right? And then I think with Bob Lazar, it was element 115, which did not exist when he actually talked about it, but they did find a way to create it, right? So, or they just did discover it since then. So there is something to that. Can you put your hands around it? Is it free energy, which means you just get the energy from quantum fluctuations, or is it anti-gravity propulsion? I don't know, but I think there is something to that. There is a technology that is, could be hidden. It could be from known governments. It could be from unknown
Hmm.
civilizations. I don't know. So I think that is one bucket behind what we're seeing is there's technology, and that would come also from the fact that when UFOs were being observed just at the observational level, there became a government interest in, first of all, debunking it, right? Because that was in the 60s, Sign, Grudge, Blue Book. There was a public effort to debunk it. Oh, you saw Venus, you saw a star, right? And then when the UFO community started to have legs and get bigger, there was intentional misinformation put into the community. And that's when the stories became very fantastical. like they're very hard to believe, right? Without much evidence, right? There's never any evidence, right? No DNA sample, nothing, right? So I think the technology piece, I'm pretty confident that's part of the piece, right? So that's just simple logic that adds up, right? And then I think when they talk about aliens, I think there's a couple of dimensions there. Um, you could kind of think of this idea of Nordics as being humans from a civilization that we don't know about or has been hidden, right? So, I talked about this with you a little bit. I think your brother too. Is that if you look at archaeology, and this guy on YouTube named Michael Button, he does a very good job on this. If you look at you know our understanding of archaeology and the ancient past, we know very little. We know very little because the idea of preserving evidence of civilization or creatures from a long time ago, um, a very small percent of it gets preserved, right? And we do know that there was an event the Bible calls the flood. I think the technical term in archaeology is the Younger Dryas, which happened about 12, 13 to 11,000 years ago. Um, it basically probably wiped out a lot of evidence of ancient civilizations. And I think it is very possible that there are civilizations that are pre Diluvian, pre flood, which somehow survived. That is also why I think they keep seeing UFOs come from under the water. Because one idea is these civilizations actually started to survive under the water, under the earth, right? So some of these civilizations that are fabled, like Atlantis, the Vril Society, or High Brazil, they could easily be the civilizations that had advanced technology 15,000 years ago, but decided to, in order to survive the Younger Dryas, they maybe went underground or under the water, right? So I think those ideas of seeing Nordics, which look like humans, could be a breakaway or hidden society. Um, I think that's also there's a reason why people started to get, I guess, protective of Antarctica when some of the ice started to melt. I think there's probably evidence of ancient civilizations there, or maybe just a hidden civilization there, and people, in the government or the Pope, they may know about it, right? So John Kerry and the Pope went down when the ice started melting, and I don't think people go to Antarctica for no reason, right? So I think that's a Nordic case, right? Um, I think some of the ideas of reptilians as an alien would make more sense to say if there's reptilians, maybe they evolved on the earth or under the earth in parallel with humans, right? So that's not out of the question if you think about it. But I think the idea that there's a alien an alien biologic that looks like a lizard uh, that comes from 10,000 light years away is less believable than saying there's a reptilian humanoid on Earth, right? I think that's more likely. And again, that could be the breakaway civilization also, right? And then I think some of these encounters that people are having in terms of being abducted, um, there's strong evidence that these alien encounters are almost identical to some of the stories of succubus and incubus, basically demons that sit on your chest and
Mhm.
paralyze you, right? They're very similar, very similar. So when Jacques Vallée says his conclusion is that these alien encounters are more likely interdimensional beings, the way I interpret it is some of these things, not all of them, some of these things are either sleep paralysis events, or they could be demonic activity. I don't rule that out as a Christian, right? So, uh, because of the similarity, you know, between sleep paralysis events and some of these events, and then the parallels between these alien abduction encounters and succubus accounts, which are demonic, they're too similar to dismiss, right? So I think there's something to that where some of these things are spiritual in nature. So you're getting from physical to spiritual, right? So I think there's something to that. Um, so I think that's kind of the main categories you can kind of think of in three buckets. Yes, there is hidden technology, right? For instance, a good one would be this guy named Brad Schreit, I think his name is. Um, he was talking one time about these UFO sightings in upstate New York in the early 80s. The the uh, the sightings were so detailed that people made models of the sightings. They could see that much detail in the sightings, right? But his conclusion is they were probably secret platforms for over the horizon radar. So, in other words, if you want to spy on Russia from the United States, you basically you can't send a radar signal over the horizon. You have to bounce it off something. And his speculation is that these things they saw were actually classified military equipment that would be able to send signals over the horizon, right? So that's another good example of one bucket. Stealth technology is another one. There's technology that's hidden, secret, right? Could be the US government, could be breakaway civilizations, could be something else, but it's out there, right? And then the second bucket is where are these aliens coming from? Probably not extraterrestrial, could either be demonic activity or it could be, you know, people or creatures that we don't know about on the earth, right? So they've come up with a phrase for this lately called ultra terrestrial, right? So I think if anything, if there's anything to these sightings other than pure fiction, it would be an ultra terrestrial sighting, something that is here on the earth or maybe in the near planets, but not something from another galaxy. I think that's physically almost impossible, right? So I think, when I look at some of these UFO um, videos and these accounts and how people speculate about this stuff, I think I just drew my own conclusion, which is there's probably just two buckets. One is technology they want to hide. Second one is, something either ultra terrestrial or spiritual going on in terms of these quote unquote aliens, right? So,
Yes, Aquay.
so what is your thought on crop circles.
Fake.
Fake. Yeah, I think there's something to that. I think they are fake. Um, I do know the crop circle phenomena was big in the 1990s. And basically, they started to realize once they looked into it again, there were CIA operatives involved, right? And the interesting thing is one guy who was involved with it, John Lundberg, he actually produced the movie Mirage Men that outed Richard Dowdy as a intelligence agent, right? So it's pretty interesting. It's pretty interesting. But yeah, that's crop circles is another thing I took of note as something going on there.
Did you see the guy? I forgot what's his name. He was like holding a piece of wood, was holding it with and a rope, and he was just like stepping on that piece of wood, you know, and that's how he was making the crop circles. I don't know if you've seen that.
Yeah,
Yeah, because I saw and the guy did it, and I said, wow, that's a nice pattern what he did. But then
yeah, yeah.
again, the the mystery is like if they said it was formed, and then they come with those radioactive detector, and they detect there's a radioactive signature behind. So how do you explain that?
Yeah, I
Some of
don't
them
I don't
that
think there's one answer. I think some
yeah,
of it
so
is fake, but some of it's not, right?
yeah.
So
Uh, I've seen videos where they show like a live camera, but of course this could have been altered by AI or by Photoshop, whatever. So they show a field, it's breezy, it's moving, and also you see this little thing going through it real quick, and then when he passed by, he did a couple of circles and he left. Then you see the the crop circle already formed, and I say, oh no, no way. So
Yeah, you make a good point. It's like, what would be convincing evidence? What would be convincing evidence of aliens for you in the age of AI? That's
hmm
a really hard question. Now, in the movie we saw, Disclosure Day, and this they probably do have this, is they claim they can get a video and they can tell if it's been doctored, produced by AI. But yeah, outside of that, what would be evidence that
exactly.
these are real? Like, and sorry, spoiler alert, but in the end, they had all these videos. The natural response to the person nowadays would be, "Oh, that's just all AI, right?" But then, spoiler alert. But in the end of the movie, they just wheeled out the alien, right? And so,
hmm
would that be the thing that does it for you? Is to actually see one? You know?
I agree. I saw one today on that um, on that website. There were three UFOs just flying. And then whoever who took the video say he was like amazed, like I can't believe it. I got this on film. I can't be, you know. And then right behind them, they were not going flying fast. They were like just three flying normal. And then on the far back, you see like one or two jet fighter following. And it was on. I don't know if you got to see that one.
Mm-mm.
Yeah. So I don't know, man. It was filming in Las Vegas. So whoever was on the on
Can you
the
find
whoever was
if you
at
can
the
find
bottom.
it? You can look at it now. Can you find it? You can share it. You see the little share button?
Yeah, I just forgot
What
which one because I was at work and I was just going through some of this stuff, and then I just looked at it, and then I just paused it, and then I just jumped to another one. Some of the one that I saw was like the regular things like there's the sky, there's two orbs, one light. That's about it.
What would you say? Orbs over Las Vegas?
I would say you put UFOs, and jet fighter. Let me see if I can find it here. Hold on.
Is it UFO swarm film buzzing over Area 51?
No, it was. There were three UFOs flying, almost in formation, and then you can say that it was like almost sunset. Let me see. I can.
Oh, okay. Here we go. Here we go. Let me try to share.
You found it?
This is not been. I don't know. We'll find out. Here we go. Look familiar?
Okay. Wonder where they're going.
See, those look like drones to me. I don't know how
One,
you feel
two,
about it.
three. Orbs,
No, that wasn't it.
planes,
All right.
orbs pretending to be
Super planes.
planes.
Those look like,
Heading
another thing that
towards
looks like is
Nellis Air
Chinese
Force
lanterns.
Base, possibly.
Let me see if we can find something else. $1,700 UFO sightings. Were you talking about this night vision shows a 10-foot alien? Do you want to look at that?
You can, yeah, just play. Let's see what it looks like.
I remember the guy getting panicked, like, it's real. That's it.
Las Vegas
Well, that
Metro
was Las
Police
Vegas,
officer's
yeah.
body cam catches this. Something flashing low in the sky.
911 emergency.
Minutes later,
There's like an 8-foot person beside it, and another one is beside it, and it has big eyes and looking at us, and it's still there.
someone calls 911 reporting two large figures in their backyard.
I'm still nervous right now.
The 8 News Now investigators obtaining another officer's video as he's sent to the Northwest.
I see
Oh,
that.
we don't want to see that.
Oil.
Yeah, I saw that one before. Let me check this one real quick.
You can share it.
Yeah, I'm trying to find it. Was it this one? No, not that one. Hmm.
While you're looking, here's the typical thing that I've found on the the disclosure dump. Of course, I haven't looked at all the pages. I've just randomly clicked on here and there. But this is your typical thing. In this day and age, I'm only thinking one thing when I see that: drone. looks like a drone to me. It could be shaped as a UFO. It looks like a drone, but yeah, I'm not completely convinced when I see this. It'd be interesting if I was there. I would definitely try to track it.
Yeah, we'll let you know. I don't, but I saw it here though. Oh well.
All right. Well,
Yeah,
we're
that's the,
at
well,
the
that's not
hour
it,
and a
but that's the one that I saw. It's like when I looked at it, it's like just two lights. It could be like I say, it's like two drone flying in formation.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. Well, we're at the hour and a half mark, so I think we can draw it to a conclusion, Ricardo. So, your last thoughts about the alien phenomenon?
I will say I'm interested only on that 5 to 3% that will convince me. You know, Everything else, is just like like sci-fi. You look at
Yeah,
every day, you see a lot of videos right there on TikTok, on YouTube. But some of the Pentagon, I'm gonna watch it because if it's from a point of view of a jet fighter, commercial airline, and those people, they've flown for years, so they have more credibility. But then again, the U.S. government will not share that technology with some commercial pilots. So
yeah, very good. Yeah, I think I'm gonna go ahead. It'll probably take me a long time, but I'm gonna go through all the material they've released. Um,
yeah,
I'm specifically looking for videos because I haven't seen any videos that make me go wow, right? But I am looking for these odd little documents for that glimmer of truth, right? So I was pretty excited to see something about a memo talking about Nazi technology, you know. So I'm looking for those kind of things to kind of put the pieces together.
there's a
But I
video.
think,
There's a video. Have you heard of Hector Elizondo?
oh yeah, yeah. Oh,
He's a big
Luis
figure, right?
Elizondo. Yeah,
He was at the and I saw this clip. He was at the Joe Rogan show, and he said that's one of the best evidence that he's seen so far. It shows, of course, this is infrared. It showed that little orb or whatever was flying near the surface, and you see going at really speed, and then also it goes underwater, and the radar somewhat tracks a little bit, and then it pops out again and keeps keeps flying straight. Now, if you had a drone that could do that, like at that speed, if it crashes the water, it's gonna disintegrate. But
yeah, yeah,
somehow it holds, and then it comes out of the surface, breaks out the surface, and just keep going on the same trajectory. So something like that is like that's gonna be a very very top secret because I don't know any of anything that can do that. Not even like a high end drone that can do something like that. So
yeah. It would be tough to engineer that. So, and again, it doesn't necessarily point to aliens
mhm.
or anything like that. You can speculate it is, but it is possible they can engineer that type thing, right? So, yeah, I definitely will look into that one. I was trying to find it while you were talking, but
and
I'm not
and
entirely
and there's
convinced I
another
found it.
one that is very very amazing, very fantastic. I would say very uncanny. They show a UFO, like flying, and also there's a Hellfire missile that they
Oh, I saw that one. Yeah.
that bounce off of it. It's like not even the missile exploded; it just bounced off. And how do you explain something like that? Where
That would be hard to explain. Yeah.
yeah, because they show a missile, hitting a weather balloon or a Chinese spy balloon, and the material is not that great, you know, that makes them float. And that thing exploded. So you're talking about something flying fast and it's metal and it makes contact with a missile and it bounces off. Hakui, that's sci-fi, Hakui.
Yeah, so there's some mystery there, which is good because I've been looking at this stuff for 30 years,
Mhm.
and I just started to realize there's not many mysteries here. You know, it would be fantastical to say there's ultra terrestrials or things like that, or some of the technology could be fantastic. But in
Mhm.
terms of something surprising, you know, we haven't had some very strong evidence for it. So I'll just leave it that way. Still some room for mystery, but the window is smaller and smaller, especially when you look at the broad evidence and find out a lot of the best stories, which turn into movies and X Files and
Mhm.
books and stuff, is actually created by someone, and it is fiction. So in other words, they just have a good nose for fiction. They can make up these stories, right? So, and I think, like I said, they want to cover something up and might make some sense. National security. You don't want your enemies to know what you're doing. You know, that kind of stuff. So, yeah, sure, it could be aliens. Why not, right? So, all right. Well, I'll stop the recording for now. Thanks for joining me. The master of all things UFO. And I think for the next one, we'll have to think of a good topic. I think we can talk about that in a minute. So we'll end it here and then we'll stay on the line for a little bit longer. Thanks.
Okay, Hakui.